specifically in the Marine Division. The last year, we used to be known as the Port Commerce Division, but we've somewhat rebranded, and we now call ourselves just the Port Department. So, a small, intimate group, about 20 minutes, and I'm going to focus primarily on developments in the shipping industry as it relates to the container business. But I would also note that while the container franchise at the port occupies probably certainly the largest percentage of our maritime footprint, both on the New York and New Jersey side, it's also about 70% of our revenue. Our other maritime businesses, specifically the automobile business, finished automobiles, the cruise business, are actually all on a very strong upward trajectory. Bulk has been somewhat of a stable, slightly declining, but that also reflects the footprint that we have actually devoted to those business lines. So let's just talk a little bit about the competitive profile. I actually think within the big port authority, the fact that we actually have competition actually is a differentiator when compared to, say, our brethren that are running the airports or the bridges. Our customers have choice. We are right now the largest port, certainly on the container side, on the East Coast. Number 3 in the U.S., North America, when you start combining the Canadian ports and the West Coast ports. We're actually closing in on the port of Long Beach. Sometimes the statistics are a bit misleading because the Southern California port complexes of L.A. and Long Beach tend to be amalgamated into a single universe. But there's actually 2 public port authorities there. We're number 3, but gaining on Long Beach. There's a lot of shifts going on. I would think our most potent competition on the East Coast is probably Norfolk in Virginia, and probably Savannah. And I'll talk a little bit about the competitive profile here, because obviously we're not competing against the local New York market. We're competing against the other ports on the East Coast, and certainly on the West Coast for the inland cargo. Think Ohio Valley, think Upper Midwest, that generally reaches those destinations by either truck or by rail. We often we'd like to say that our success in terms of our growth and our volume is attributable to solid management at the port. I think that speaks for itself, but frankly, what makes the port successful is that we have a very large and robust local regional market, and this port is geographically placed to reach that market. And you can kind of see the capture regions in terms of the population base. It's unfortunate in one perspective that the container industry gets mostly talked about by the inbound leg, the import leg. Consumption, population base drives retail goods, purchasing power. Obviously, that is the driver in our container volume. Obviously, there's another side to this, too, the export leg. Frankly, it's a bit less sexy. Our exports in this country tend to be dominated by raw material products, waste paper, scrap metal types of things. The import side is both the stronger leg, more profitable for the shipping companies, but there is, in fact, an export market as well. But our big advantage in terms of where we're placed in the shipping industry is really a byproduct of the massive market that's domiciled and within access to the port, either by truck or by rail. Shipping does not get a lot of big press. I think the shipping industry has made the front cover of the New York Times, or certainly Time magazine, once in my lifetime, and that was when Jackie Kennedy married Aristotle Onassis. Probably nothing between the late 60s and the big event when you had sort of this political issue with the Dubai Port World issue with foreign ownership of terminal leases. In recent years, we've seen articles about the Panama Canal, and then in the last couple of actually days, we've been hearing references to the Jones Act, which is actually, there is no Jones Act. There is a Merchant Marine Act of 1920 related to ship capacity for places like Puerto Rico and suspension of the Jones Act because of the hurricanes in Texas. So, shipping tends to just get, snippets when things flare up. In the news, the last early September was the arrival of Marseille, France's CMA CGM's Teddy Roosevelt. This became a news story, gladly, because this is the largest container vessel ever to call the New York harbor at 14,400 20-foot equivalent units, often referred to as TEUs, the basic unit of measure. And this is really where I'm going to spend most of my topic today, about the evolution of ship size, what's driving it, what does it mean for us. And I think here a picture tells many stories. So less PowerPoints here and more visual. The bulk of the Port Authority's marine terminals are actually on the New York side, New Jersey side of the harbor. Between the two facilities on the New York side, in Red Hook in Brooklyn and Howland Hook in Staten Island, that only comprises about less than 6% of the container volume. So New Jersey side of the river, for reasons that I think people mostly know, is where the action is. It's interesting in that as the ships have gotten larger, and when we say larger, it's not just a function that they're carrying more TEUs. The ships, from an engineering standpoint, are getting longer, and they're also getting wider. Proportionately, they're not taking on exponentially more draft, and that's just obviously the physics of water. But you definitely need to be a port authority that can capture these vessels. You need to have 50 feet of water, and of course the Channel Improvement Project was officially completed in September of last year, and of course the berths have been deepened accordingly. This is the capability to handle these ships is driving a huge amount of infrastructure investments on the terminal side. New cranes, higher cranes, cranes that have higher outreach. I think that we're right now going through a master planning initiative at the port for the Port Department. We should be finished by first quarter of next year, and we're really looking at the near-term and long-term constraints over a 30-year window in terms of what the trend in larger ships mean for us. And I think a few things really strike out right now, and that is the capacity of the navigation channel through the Kilvan Cull. Today, over 90% of the container volume to the Port of New York and New Jersey is actually flowing through that fairly narrow navigation channel. We've already done simulations with the Sandy Hook pilots and others on the 14,000s, like you see here, and we've also gone to the next level to about 18,000 TEUs, and probably 18,000 TEUs is probably going to be our our cap in terms of navigation ability to serve the market. I would note, though, that the Panama Canal, the expand and deepen canal, its capacity in terms of ability to accommodate these ships, they're pretty much at the 14,500 TEU capacity. So anything larger than the Teddy Roosevelt is only going to be coming to the Port of New York, New Jersey via the other canal, which doesn't get as much attention, and that's the Suez Canal. I would note, just as a random comment, that we actually have more vessels calling the port coming from the Suez Canal than we do the Panama Canal. This is kind of an interesting dynamic in terms of global trade flows. Good geography on the Northeast kind of puts us in a good position for cargo coming from both sides. So this was a milestone. We are starting to see, as a result of the completion of the Bayonne Bridge project, it's nice to invest $1.6 billion and see results rather quickly from that. We are actually seeing now a steady stream of 8,000, 10,000 TEU vessels flowing into our market. I think everybody knows that the ships have been trending higher, larger. They've been doing so really ever since I've been in the industry. I started with Sealand as a management trainee in 1985. In 1990, West Coast-based American President Lines launched their C-10s, which were 4,400 TEU vessels, and it's just been on a rapid trajectory since then. Today, you have 20,000 plus TEU vessels deployed. None of them are calling the U.S., including the U.S. West Coast. But they are deployed in the Asia-Europe market, and that's, I think, you're going to continue to see the largest of the fleets, the global fleets, domiciled in the Asia-Europe market. It is still, frankly, an open debate in terms of what the trajectory is going to be in terms of ship size serving the North America market. One of the things that we haven't seen so far is a rationalization of ship calls up and down the West Coast. The thinking had always been, as the ships get bigger, you're actually going to see ports fall out of the rotations. In this first round of or the next round of carrier alliances reshuffling, actually we've seen just the opposite. More ports are being called. Baltimore, Boston, Philadelphia, and everything to the south of us. And there is, in fact, continued activity and interest in developing ports in eastern Canada as well, certainly in Halifax, in St. John's. Now, as everybody in this room knows, the shipping industry can change with one phone call and one email. It's a very fluid industry, and this current blaze of reshuffling and alliance arrangements with shipping lines is still very much in its early infancy. I would say for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, frankly, we are benefiting by this. They all want to call here. Why do they all want to call here? We have the infrastructure, the bridge has been raised, and there's just a large local market. In 20 minutes, you can't do justice to all the various drivers that are happening in this market, but with large ships, with cargo, also comes all the landside things, the industrial real estate market, spec warehousing that's going up, the Central Jersey, North Jersey, even into the Lehigh Valley, Staten Island. The industrial real estate market in our back door is just amazingly strong, and you're just seeing a huge amount of million-plus square foot distribution facilities being built all around us. And I would also note that it's just not all Amazon, and it's just not all e-commerce. That's a big part of it, but it's pretty much all the retail goods serving this really fast-growing market. It's actually a pretty exciting time. Just a couple of slides here. I think, frankly, this increase in vessel size, it's a topic that everyone has observed, but it's not actually a topic that the industry has spent a whole lot of time really talking about. And that's, well, why have the ships gotten bigger, and is it going to have a happy ending? Well, of course, in shipping, the happy ending is always a function of what place you are in that sort of continuum. But I think that the last sort of movement of the deployment of large ship, the building of a large ship, was a coping mechanism in response to what looked to be at the time sustainably high bunker fuel prices. The decisions to build these large ships, and I'm talking the 12, 14, 18, 20, came in response to bunker fuel in excess of $100 per barrel. So right off the bat, the current situation is far from that. You have bunker today averaging, I think right now in the oil certainly in the mid 50s right now. So a coping mechanism, but fuel costs have actually moderated significantly downward. Poses a question: what does that mean for the shipping industry and the economics of these large ships? Larger ships were also a coping mechanism in response to everything we all know in this room. Historic, uncompensatory financial returns in the shipping industry, looking for scale economics, driving slot costs down. Certainly competitive forces, carriers tend to chase market share, and that has sort of been a propelling influence in driving freight rates down. All the alliance and vessel sharing strategies, this is when the ocean carriers come together, much like code sharing in the airline industry, is another coping mechanism in response to, frankly, the fact that the shipping industry, certainly the container industry, has been not really a financial success story. Coupled with all of these sort of macroeconomic factors has also been advances in hull design and propulsion systems. These newer ships certainly are more efficient. They're burning less fuel. Interestingly enough, they're actually being deployed at lower speeds just as a function to save fuel costs. So it's a rather interesting thing right now that even though you have shipping companies that have obviously spent hundreds of millions and billions in larger ships to drive certain efficiencies, I would contend that at today's fuel costs, that carriers who actually didn't go that direction, the gap between their underlying slot cost economics really aren't that much higher on these large ships. So this is going to be a very interesting thing to see how it plays out. I'm not making an observation to say that the large ships are going to disappear. Quite the contrary. They're here. They will continue to be here. They will continue to grow. But I would just note that as an observation, the economic factors that propelled those large ships to be here have in fact nothing to do with global trade growth in trade in the United States. It was all built on a series of coping mechanisms for broader macroeconomic issues in the shipping industry. And I think this is just something that's just part of the history of the shipping industry, timing decisions to actual market events. I'm about close to out of time, but I do want to give you a visibility to the players that dominate this. I would note right off the bat that with only a couple of exceptions, this is, the Americans have disappeared. Not that necessarily means a whole lot, but from a Port Authority perspective, all of our major customers, they're not headquartered in the United States. Asset decisions, investment decisions aren't made in the United States. We're spending more time on the road. My boss, the director of the port, actually just came back from Europe last week. We'll be in Asia next week. I would also say another kind of interesting observation. 10 years ago, if you were to say who would have been the largest global shipping companies in the world, I think everyone in the room would always raise their hand and say it's going to be Maersk Lines, and that has continued to be the case. But no one would have said MSC, Mediterranean Shipping Company, and very few would have said Marseille-based CMA CGM. The dominant carriers in the global container shipping industry have a decidedly European bent to them. The Chinese, led by COSCO, are responding to this. They've announced that they're going to be purchasing Hong Kong-based OCL, Orient Overseas Container Lines. So there's a lot of shifting. We had a bankruptcy in Korean-based Hanjin. The walkaway here is that what we're seeing in the global shipping industry is somewhat analogous to what we saw here in the North America airline industry. The legacy carriers are getting bigger. There's a huge amount of M&A activity that has already played out, probably a little bit more to go. Smaller players like Yang Ming Line and Zim probably don't have the scale to go on it forever on a solo basis. Zim, the Israeli carrier, they're the number 6 carrier calling the port of New York, New Jersey. MSC is the largest carrier. I mentioned before that we completed the harbor deepening project. Really kudos to the Port Authority and the Army Corps of Engineers. We finished that project on the front end of the curve. Port authorities up and down the coast are still trying to catch up. Civil Works project funded by the Corps. It's, you run into pretty much every congressional issue known to mankind. And of course, we were really delighted with the completion of the Bayonne Bridge. This was a Port Authority project. It was actually overseen by our Tunnels and Bridges division. It was a massively interesting civil works project from an engineering perspective, and you know, there's certainly no shortage of things to find criticism with the Port Authority. But I think in terms of delivering complex infrastructure, this is one area where the Port Authority continues to excel. So thank you very much.